Hello everyone, who doesn't love a nice rumble bass? As the video title suggests, I'll be showing you how to make a deep rumble bass. So let's just get right to it. I'm gonna mute some of these other like little elements, mute that little synth for now and this top loop, and we'll just keep, yeah, that kind of dusty little noise and that little soft hi-hat there. Okay, so there's multiple ways to go about making a sound like this. I'm going to show you one method here today. So the first thing I'm going to do is just take off all of this processing, and we're going to go through everything one by one. Okay. All right, so the first thing is I've used Contact for this, and I've just loaded that up, and I put down a simple quarter note 1-bar loop here, looping over a quarter note. The next thing is finding the right source material to work with. So for this type of sound and this method, I usually go for like a percussion loop, or maybe an atmosphere loop, maybe a drone, or some sort of weird musical loop can work nice. I mean, there's lots of different kind of source material that would work good for a bass like this. In this particular example, I ended up using an atmosphere loop. So just to show you exactly what I would do, I would just, open up Contact. I'd go through my sample library and find, a folder of loops that I think might work. And then I'd go through it. So I'd load that into the Contact. Here's another sound that I was playing around with that I didn't end up using. But I'd load that in, open up this wrench tab here, then you could kind of start editing the sample. So, I would just flick through the samples by using these arrow tabs here till I found something that kind of sparked some inspiration, and then I'd maybe, sift through the sample with the start position, and then I usually would, pitch it down here. Sometimes I'll use this Time Machine Pro algorithm, which just pitches the sample and doesn't stretch it. So whatever you want to do there, it could sound good either way. And that's really it. It's just about finding the right little groove to start, treating and processing from there. So I ended up with this atmosphere loop here. On this one, I didn't even need to pitch it down. It was already a low kind of rumbly sample, so I didn't need to pitch it down. I just sifted through the sample till I found a nice start position, and then I started working from there. So as you can hear there, we had that really high screeching sound on top. So the first thing I did was filter this down. So I used the Moog multi-filter, which is one of my favorite filters. I love the drive on it, so I added a fair bit of drive. And by default, this filter, if you, it comes with the resonance kind of pushed up a little bit. If I push the resonance up on this, it tends to take away some of the low weight of the sound. So you can hear there. So I took off the resonance and just filtered that down to start. And then the next thing I did was add another EQ just to take away some of the very low end that I didn't really necessarily need. And I felt like it was just kind of a little bit flabby and muddy down there. So just cut everything below 300 Hertz and then added a nice little boost here around 270. So you can hear that without the EQ. And then with. Just kind of brings out some of those nice low mids and kind of evens it out a little bit, as there's lots of heavy information down here, but just to give it a little boost here in this 250 Hertz range, I thought was working quite nice. One other thing to note, I did start this whole process by putting some sidechain on the bass bus, because I'm going to be doing some parallel processing and adding, you know, some layers into this sound. And, you know, this sound needed to be sidechained quite heavily. So the first thing I did actually was just put on a sidechain, and I'm sidechaining it quite aggressively. If I take the sidechain off, you'll hear how flabby it is. So added the sidechain first, and then I started, you know, looking for the right sample and starting to processing it. So once I kind of had that basic sound, then I wanted to add a little bit of like girth to it, and maybe a little bit of texture. So I set up this distortion auxiliary track here. So I'm using this, I think, underused plugin from FL Studio, which is Hardcore. And I'm using this to add a little distortion, and then I use some chorus as well. And let's just hear what this is sounding like on its own. So I'm just going to turn this up. Okay. So that's what we're mixing in. And also, by just switching the cabinets, you get a different flavor. It changes the flavor quite a bit. So if I go to like Model A, you can see that one's quite different. I ended up with the Model E. I thought worked quite nice. And then, I'm just following that with an EQ and just kind of focusing in on the low mids here and cutting the super lows, which I don't need. Like I said, those frequencies are already heavily present in the main sample. So I just wanted to thicken up the sound, give it a little bit of girth and texture. And then I've just mixed that into taste. So without the distortion, parallel track, and with. I think it's adding some nice body there. And again, all these parallel tracks, everything's routed back through the bass bus, so everything is going through that side chain. The next thing I wanted to add was a little bit of space, and a little bit of depth. So I used another auxiliary track here, and I've used Guitar Rig for this one. There's a really cool reverb that I like to use sometimes. It's this vintage verb, because you have all these different types of plates and different types of spring reverbs. I ended up using this Gold S plate reverb, and then just rolled off a lot of the low end, which I didn't need. Again, I just kind of wanted to add some space, but I didn't want to add too much, you know, width in the very low end. So let's just hear this soloed. So that's what I'm mixing in there. But it's just enough to give it a little bit of space and a little bit of extra depth. So without that reverb, and with. And then without both of those auxiliary tracks, and then with. So it's just thickening it up a little bit. It's adding a little bit of like girth and texture and a little bit of space with that reverb. And then I did some more work on the actual bus. So the first thing I did was add some compression just to kind of, you know, squeeze these layers together, control the dynamics a little bit, really get a nice consistent sound. So I used the trusty SSL bus compressor. Not a lot of compression without it. And I did use the sidechain filter here. So I'm only sidechaining everything from about 60 hertz and up. I didn't want to sidechain, or excuse me, only compressing everything from 60 hertz and up. I didn't want to compress the super low end. So that's an important thing to note. It's because I felt like the low end was just, it just had a lot of energy, and it was really just making the compressor react too hard. So I just rolled that low end off, and that's just helping kind of bring everything together and giving a nice little boost to the low mids. You know, we got a slow attack here, fast release, kind of nice punchy settings. So a little bit of compression, pretty simple there. I followed that with actually a limiter just to control it a little bit more. I'm only shaving off about a dB here, as you can see. I don't typically use limiters like this, but for like a big kind of techno style rumble bass, I would maybe, if I was going to do a bass like this, you could be maybe a little bit more aggressive with some of the compression and processing. So I just felt like I wanted to control it a little bit more and even things out just a touch, and maybe get a little bit more kind of level out of it. So just a little bit of limiting there, and then just to make sure that the low end is nice and tight, I've just monoed everything below about 160. Hear that? I did like the, you know, I wanted there still to be some nice like space and depth, so I left everything above 160 alone. You can see there, we got it. But that'll just make sure we're you know, compatible on mono systems. Without this ozone, it's not a huge difference, but you can definitely hear the bass tighten up and be more focused and defined. Okay, and then lastly, I've just added this Pultec EQ just to do some like overall basic final tone shaping with it, and I've just used this pretty subtly. I've only, let's see, I've just taken a little bit out of 300 hertz and then added a little bit more at 100 hertz. And if you just run a signal through this UAD Pultec emulation, it just gives a nice little like touch of analog character without even touching the settings. So I thought that sounded nice on this rumble bass as well. So we're just doing some final tone shaping and adding a little touch of character with this Pultec EQ. So with that, without EQ, and with, yeah, not a huge difference, but it's definitely just adding a little finishing touch. And there you go. That's one method that I would go about using to make a deep rumble bass. What I've actually done is I've bounced out this rumble bass as just a sample, two versions, one with the kick and one without the kick. And I'm going to give those away as a free download. Links in the description if you want to download this rumble and the rumble with the kick as a sample. Go ahead and do that. It's in the description. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave me a comment or question and I'll get back to you. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.